Yes,
I love
that is the workshop back there.
the career workshop.
Yeah, I need all these tools in order to help people with their resumes and their cover letters. And, you really got to take things apart and put them back together,
Martin, you're so punny. You ready to roll? I got some tabs open, Martin, so I can show things later. I mean,
Ooh, I like it.
whatever
I
you
like
want,
it.
Martin.
Thank you for being number 2 on the Career Therapy Podcast, the very unprofessional professional podcast, where we're just kind of throwing it together and talking about careers with folks who are, or who in my mind have had very fascinating ones, and who have actually had quite an impact on my own career. So the last one was with Grant
Wow.
Zemont, who he was the first person I think I really networked with in college. And I had this really embarrassing moment where I got hot chocolate at Starbucks when I met him because I had no idea what coffee was or how to read all the menu items or order or anything.
That's a lot.
And then you and I met through Startup Institute. So that is how I became a coach. That was my very first official coaching gig, pretty much. Yeah. So I know you had some ideas of things you wanted to chat about career-wise today. The way I want to maybe kick it off is to start by just thinking about what has been your approach to defining your career? Whether it's been haphazard, whether it's been planned, what have been some surprises?
I had the opportunity to think about it early because I had taken some courses in college. I had a leadership minor, and one of the courses was we would read books about, people talking about how to design your life. So I think I knew that it was possible to do that. But to be honest, I just don't think consciously I knew enough about what, who I was and what I wanted and what would overlap with that. So truly, until I was honestly, until this current job search, I would say, and I've done a lot of cool things that I really liked, but I would say it was kind of just happened up until now, where I left undergrad. In undergrad, I was really involved in student government, all that stuff. So all my mentors were working in what you call, student affairs. So I went and got a grad degree in that, which was a cool gig. You work on campus, they pay for your master's usually. But then I graduated and I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. And then I went abroad and I found through a series of, again, coincidences, this thing called Startup Institute, which was an early, career and technical skills accelerator for adults. And I went through as a student in marketing. And then I think just through conversations, they realized, oh, you have a little bit of an education background. Would you want to go and run the education portion of the program in Chicago? And I said yes. And the reason I get that far in the story is I remember opening up a journal that I had written when I was in either grad school or late college that listed out the things that I thought I wanted in my career. And I said, I want to make about $60,000 a year. I want to be able to do something with technology, something with training, and then to get to travel a little bit for work, once or twice a year. And I had totally forgotten that I wrote that. And then when I read that whilst working at Startup Institute, I was just like, holy crap, that is literally the thing I am doing now. All 4 of those check boxes that I had written, 5 years prior and not really kept thinking about and had kind of just happened. So I guess my answer, and that's a long way, is that I think that there were probably things subconsciously that I had identified and that were just kind of turned me on from an energy perspective, but I wasn't consciously able. I didn't attach to them consciously. I was able to write them that one time, but I didn't plan things. I went and taught English in Chile. I did this thing in Boston. I was kind of all over. So yeah, I would say unplanned, but there was some stuff bubbling up in terms of what I knew I liked.
That's really fascinating. I think what's that one book where they're set your intention and the future will happen. What is that book? It's
The Secret.
The Secret, right? Yeah, I've never read it, but it's that whole concept of if you just put it out there, things will happen. I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to that, but I do like the idea that I do believe that writing things down is 100% a way to subconsciously like imprint. And so that's crazy that happened. And so
It was nuts.
if you were to sort of backwards kind of let's say you're doing like a post-mortem now on your career, right? You're looking backwards and trying to connect all the dots. What do you think were some of the subconscious things that became conscious? Like, what were some of the actions that drove you to do over time that led to the outcomes that ended up happening?
Yeah, I think, and to be honest, I'm struggling with a little bit of this now as I try to pick the right thing. I think it was that I had identified a number of those pieces separately as things of interest. Like, I want to make some money. I love technology. I like education. Like, I like moving around. And so I think even consciously that had bubbled up, but I hadn't figured out a way to put them together really. So to answer the question, I think like I was making decisions consciously that would fill one of those. Like, I went to Chile and taught English for like 8 months after grad school. Okay, that's the education thing. Then I got accepted into this technical training program in Boston, Startup Institute. Okay, that was clearly technology. And then once I got there, the people realized that I had this education background, and they suggested, honestly, I don't know why, sounds probably kind of stupid. It never occurred to me whilst working at Startup Institute, whilst a student in the boot camp, one, that I could work there. Like, I don't know why I was never like, oh, this would be a good fit. But like, they kind of suggested that. So I guess to answer your question, I think it was making decisions in line with at least pieces I knew I was interested in. And then like, it's like, once you make that move, then when you get another signal of what you're interested in, you're already at least fulfilling that one part. So it felt like, I guess kind of what happened was it became cumulative and it kept snowballing because I wouldn't ever intentionally go in a direction I didn't like. I was able to go like into education, then into technology, and then, oh my God, they let me combine them both at Startup Institute. So I think it was just, as far as I could process in my brain, was like, I was making a little decision at the time to get a little bit more of what I liked. And that's kind of what let me do it, was like just a little bit of the window into the subconscious, I guess.
Yeah, that is, yeah. And like being able to eventually and like finally merge those things together. Were there any moments where you almost went off the rails and almost went a direction that would have taken you away from everything?
Totally. When I was finishing Startup Institute, and so I'm gonna take off my jacket because I've been having some tea now, so I'm warming up.
It's also that kind of a podcast, just
exactly. It is heating up, when I was finishing Startup Institute, I had met a mentor there who I really liked, this woman named Laura, I think it's Krachnikova, who ran a really cool agency called like Scratch Digital. And she offered me a job, and she was great. I really liked her. It would have been an opportunity to go into like the digital strategy realm, but like, learning to write better, analytics, all that kind of stuff. And I think that would have been cool, but there's just no way I think I would have liked that work as much as what I did at Startup Institute. I wouldn't have gotten to meet you and so many other people, who have ended up really being I think a big part of my community, and then honestly, like my understanding of what I like. So yeah, that was definitely an opportunity. I think that's probably the biggest one, because after that, then I did the Startup Institute thing, for about 2.5, almost 3 years, and then went to one of our big hiring partners, Clique Studios, which was a digital agency, and was there for about 4 years until, let's call it 3 months ago. And I think there, the opportunities to derail were more like internal. Like, I wasn't really like looking at other jobs per se, but I could move into different parts of the company that might not be a good fit. And those are a little bit easier to undo because you're still in the company, right? Like, they're not like, okay, you're fired. But I think in these companies where Clique was operating as many like more kind of modern companies are trying to do, in these really flat hierarchies, like they don't want any level of management or anything. And so you move around a lot in new roles. Like Google kind of does it too. They can't promote everybody, so they have to keep moving people around.
Right.
So I think that was something that I learned there, was like, oh, I can kind of move around and try things within this environment. And I don't have to switch jobs. And I just think, I'm sure that's not available everywhere, but I do think that was a huge learning, was that, there are times when you can experiment within a company, as opposed to having to move roles. There were times I knew when it was time to move Startup Institute, for a number of reasons, to leave there. But at Clique, I think I started to learn that, there were opportunities to really try new things. Like, whilst there, I did everything from, I managed our hiring. I probably hired 20 people and I think I counted once. I did like over 500 phone screens. I sold a bunch of our work. I ran an office, did the education stuff. So I was able to try all that stuff. So I'm sorry, that's such a long answer to your original question, but I think it was just, understanding over time that you're going to be able to try on the things you like and try to keep combining more of them. And kind of like, for me, I think it's kind of like the snowball rolling down the hill. I'm like trying to add more to it that's a good fit for me, because if it's a good fit for me, it's usually going to be a good fit for the company.
Do you feel like with that experimentation and being able to do so many things, do you feel like that's helped you gain more clarity and focus, or do you feel like that's given you so many experiences that now you're not quite sure where to focus?
I think totally the latter. So I think less clarity. And again, maybe a little of the first also, like, because sometimes when you're testing, you learn things you don't like doing, which is great, because that is like a really easy thing to remove off the list. And I think, everybody learns that at some point in a number of searches, whether it's job search or dating or, whatever. It's really important to also know what you don't want. And so I think the testing is great for that, because I will never forget those things and I don't have to think about them. The challenge actually for me, and the reason I said number 2, is a mix of one, you end up liking a lot of things. And so then you're like, oh, can I only take broad roles? But at least then the choice is still yours. The piece where it feels like the choice is not yours and that is challenge about those types of roles is that it becomes hard for other people to understand you and your skills. So when somebody looks at my resume or I talk to them in person, I have to do a lot more work to explain what I can do and what I'm a good fit for. Whereas if you were a digital marketing specialist and then a marketing manager and then the senior marketing manager, people are like, I get it. You manage digital marketing campaigns and you're relatively good at it. So I think that's the challenge, the biggest part. I'm able to deal with the ambiguity of me knowing I like to do multiple things, because like that makes a lot of sense. We're human beings. None of these jobs are like innate human jobs, like I don't, like these are all cultural artifacts that we are dealing with. And so it would make no sense to me that there is just one. So anyway, so that doesn't freak me out as much as it is challenging. And I don't want to derail anybody else by giving them a kind of rosy view of the world. It's very challenging to have these broad roles, because then when you go somewhere else, you have to try to explain it to them. And the easiest thing for me too, as a person that's on hiring, is let's just say I need a hammer. Maybe I'm hiring a designer, but I think the tool analogy is nice.
Yeah.
It's like hammers look for nails, because that's they're hitting those. Like I'm looking for a designer. I want the box of designer. And so the easiest thing for every hiring manager to do is find the person that just in the most, obvious way fits the mold. And so anytime you're trying to play outside of that game, there's rewards, but there's challenges too.
I do like that analogy. It's like they're sitting there with a ton of lumber and a ton of nails, and they need someone to put it together. And then people come in and they're like, I'm a creative and I really like to think outside the box. And it's like, we need you to build a box. It's like,
yeah, right.
And it's like, okay, so now we've got a disconnect. And I think that disconnect a lot of times, it comes from a sort of a split mindset that happens in the job search. I think when you go online and you start researching like how to get a job and like figuring out your career and all these different things, you're told to do a lot of self-reflection and a lot of like understand who you are, take personality tests, go figure out what your passion is, put your like list together of what you don't want to do and what you do want to do, write your ideal job description, all these different things. And you do this all in like a silo in your brain without ever putting the client or the company and their needs into the picture, right? And this is, I would make the analogy to like a startup that's like I have this amazing idea for an app, and they just run off and they build the app, but they've never talked to a customer, and they've never done any like research or testing or anything like that. And you're someone who's been at companies that's all about testing and research, things like that. So like, how do you feel like, with that in mind, where do you see sort of the human side? Like you said, as a human, it's not weird for you to see all the different aspects of what you enjoy doing, and being able to be 10 things at once internally. But externally, when you actually go to market, so to say, how are you translating that? Like, what is coming out of your mouth, or where are you just at with things right now in that whole process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. But before I answer, I want to connect one thing that at least just came to me was when we were talking about being in the company and getting to experiment kind of with your roles. One thing I want to point out there is what's cool about that is if you're thinking about like the variables of like all the things you can change in your career equation, what you're doing, seniority for whom. The nice thing about being in the company, to your point, is that variable is fixed. So I know what Clique Studios needs. So I can tweak all these other variables while still only even considering things that are going to provide benefit to Clique Studios. Unless I'm going to leave the company, which is fine. And I think that's sometimes, and it was the right choice. And and again, exited well, and I love them. But the one point I wanted to make there is, I think to your point of like, okay, what does your customer, the person that's paying you, want? That is the one nice thing of experimenting inside the company is like, you should know what they want and what is considered useful to them. And you can tweak your role a lot of the companies almost as much as you want, as long as it's providing as much or more value as you were before. So that's the benefit of that route. Now, to answer your question though, like where, and I'm sorry, sounds like there's a siren, but
it'll happen here too.
Yeah, great. How do I then go to market with that and where am I at? I think where I'm at is the first piece is like, I've been through a couple interview processes now that I've been like not in a full-time role for probably 4 months, and I just say that because I was technically unemployed, but then you pick up contracts and then it's just too hard to explain. So anyways, in that time though, as you're going through the interview processes, I think I've learned a couple things. Like one, there's some things that like I still had to let go of that like seemed cool and exciting to me, but then I realized I actually really don't want to do that. And I really wouldn't be probably good at it. And they were things that were probably, I like technology a lot, but what I realized is, and I do like even understanding it, I don't need to be the one building it, but I love communicating about it. I love understanding what value is it really going to provide and for whom, how we can get it done the quickest. I don't necessarily need to be the one like coming up with some wild long-term strategy, to build some product that we don't really even know the customer yet for. So I learned a lot of things just in like one of the places I was interviewing in terms of, turning it into the market language was in product management roles. So I've learned a lot in those 4 months, just about the different types of product manager roles. I didn't even know they existed. And I think as I talk with folks about more and more specific areas, one of the things that I have learned is that inside of the areas that I'm interested in, there are more specific ways to talk about things. So there are, for example, these implementation product managers who are really like their job is to make sure that like once we kind of have a sense of what we're building, that it's going to be built on time. We're not going to have any issues. It is what the customer wants, as opposed to these other product managers doing more strategy work. So my point with that is just, one, I've had to learn that, like which parts of product am I interested in? And then two, like that's one way you can go about it is by like, what is the market asking for? The flip side that I have been thinking about, honestly, from feedback from our mutual friend, Jen Yi, who used to work at Startup Institute, was the big boss, was that, another way you can think about your job search is based on, okay, what skills do you have? Not necessarily, you kind of have multiple ways of starting, but two could be, what am I interested in? And I look for those things. And then what skills do I have and can prove I have and look for those. And when I did this one, which is just a suggestion she gave me recently, it was like, okay, most all my skills are in the interpersonal domain, plus some technical things, which has changed the role search a little bit. I'm, talking to a couple of people more about sales and implementation roles. Yeah, I mean, I think you can probably tell based on the length of this answer that it's still fairly open-ended. I'm still having to search both in interest areas. Like I took a call with somebody about a role at a solar company just because I think solar is really cool, and specific roles that I have experience in. But so I think that's part of it. Or like if I'm gonna try to fit into a role that's available, it's that route. If I'm networking my way into the company, then I think I have a lot more room to do look, these are my skills. Do you see an opportunity for somebody like me in the company? And those are just two different job searches, and I'm trying to maintain in parallel.
Yeah. And I would even add in, like, there's the question where you said, here's my skills. Does that fit into your company? It's like, your company has this problem. Here's the 5 skills that I'll bring to the forefront to help you solve that.
That's better.
And
I like that.
what I'm kind of hearing from you is like a big theme throughout a lot of what you're saying is that you're not personally identifying like you with that role. And that's very different than what I see a lot with most people. They're like, I'm a developer and that's who I am. Or I'm a designer and that's who I am. Or like, I'll even say I'm a career coach, but I try my best not to get wrapped up in what that like could become an ego thing, could become too much of a self-identity. And then if I ever have to change out of that, like I think I did that when I was in marketing. I was like, I'm a marketer. I'm Martin the marketer. I'm like, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was like, it was my identity. I approached life with a marketing mindset. And it was in one way really empowering because I felt very strong about what I did. But on the other hand, when things got tough and I wasn't feeling so certain about marketing, I felt like the whole world was falling apart, right? And so were you always kind of able to keep the title and the job separate from your identity as a person, or has it kind of gone through fluxes?
That's a good question. I think because I've always had, at least since grad school, right? Like, sure, in grad school, I was a student affairs professional, right? I was in grad school for that. That was all I was doing. I was being paid for that. That was probably it. Once I moved to Startup Institute and I was in this like kind of startup world for a while, I think my identity was around being a like productive owner thinking worker that would just like do whatever and like as much as I could think like an owner and try to add value to the company. And there's challenges with that because if I feel like I'm not being rewarded for that, like I'm not going to respond well. And there's challenge with that now in the job search because like, again, as I said, you're totally right. I don't identify as a marketer or a HR professional or a product manager or I don't know, program manager. And I've had every one of those titles. But I think it's more an artifact of just the type of career that I've built.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Again, I think if somebody else wanted to have a really broad career, then like, and do lots of different things, then this approach might make sense. But, there's a lot of roles where it doesn't. Like, again, if you're in a position, a role type that has a very clear hierarchy and opportunities for advancement where you are, and you like doing it, there's a ton of benefits to being a defined quantity. Like it really, like there may be more benefits to doing that. It's just that doesn't suit my nature, and so, and so that never suited my nature. So I guess I would just put it that way. I don't seek, it would be nice. I've thought about it at times and it's challenging. It can suck. This is the most natural way that it's occurred for me. And if someday I end up with 3 roles in a row with the same title, then like, maybe I think over time your identity would change. Like, I don't think maybe people do, but I think it's very rare. And I would be skeptical of people intentionally changing their identity. I think more often than not, it changes over time. And then you're just like, oh shit, I'm a marketer or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and I do find it interesting because you had said the phrase, "I'm trying to fit into a role," and I think that that's like it's smart because companies. A big thing that I think people get wrong about the job search when it is very me focused in the exploration side of it, which I think you do need to do the exploration to figure out what the heck you want. But then you have to switch over into what problems do I solve for other people and go out with that like sales message rather than like you have these problems, I have these skills solve those problems, let's work together. Versus I have a problem, which is I don't have a job, and you have money and are looking to hire. So I need you to solve my problem of not having a job, which is a very common mindset that I see out there. And
Yeah.
it's definitely not the one that you take. And so what are your thoughts on that perspective and like how people might be able to change it or how you've maybe seen it? I don't know, maybe it's popped up in your head or you've seen it kind of take conversations in the right or wrong direction, the way that you approach things.
Well, I think the first thing there is like you're going to have a much more of an opportunity to have that kind of a conversation where it's like, okay, these are my skills, and but this is how I can use them to actually help you, the company, if you're able to connect with somebody at the company. That's,
Hmm.
as opposed to typically a recruiter. And I don't have any issue with recruiters. Yeah, again, I think they're working super hard, but I think you do have to keep in mind their job, depending on where they're at, is different. Their job is to
Hmm.
get lots of interviews set up. Yes, they do get compensated when somebody gets hired, but a lot of them, like they're not stupid. They do the math, and it's like if I just get more interviews, eventually, I'll get people in the right role.
Yeah.
So I do think you got to kind of keep your audience in mind. If you opportunity to talk to somebody that's the hiring manager for the thing, then yeah, I think what you said is really smart, which is like, understanding from them the problems they're having. Um, and then, if it's in fact true, and you got to be careful not that you're not just like selling to sell. It's in fact true that,
Yeah.
you say like, hey, I have these skills and I'm happy to provide kind of examples of when they've, been shown, but that will be able to help with this problem. And yeah, I mean, I think uh, any hiring manager, if you get the opportunity to talk to them like that, would respond well. In the times when, I've been able to move, so yeah, I'm going to pause there and not continue that ramble too long. But yeah, I think if you can talk to the hiring manager or somebody that actually is in one of the roles, that type of a conversation is a lot more effective. I think recruiters have different roles and they're just trying to get people in. And if
Hmm.
you are, in my experience, if you are a square and they have a round hole to fill, it's not their fault really. They just don't have the time.
Hmm.
And so yeah, so that's why I mostly try to find people to talk to at the company. And I use LinkedIn, and I'm happy to show that later, but to try to find people there and then send messages and kind of ask questions and hopefully get to the right person.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah,
And that's the recruiter thing I always find to be interesting because I know a handful of recruiters and agree they're working their butts off.
yeah,
And
that's a hard job, man.
it's a tough job. And when I talk to job seekers, when they bring up recruiters, they think they're being proactive in their job search. But really what they're trying to do is outsource it. And I'm like, so you are outsourcing your job search to someone who you are not paying to do your job search. So they're
Yeah,
getting paid by the company
yeah,
and you're hoping that they're going to do the job for you of selling you into that company, but they have no vested interest in you.
yeah,
And so they end up getting ghosted a ton and they get very down about it. And then they're like, well, I stopped applying to things because I talked to that one company who said they'd get me a contract and they never did. And I'm like, you can't shift
yeah,
that responsibility. But I like what you're saying about talking to real people at the company. And, you know, I've in all the coaching that I do, I'm constantly showing people how to use like people search on LinkedIn and all sorts of different things like that. But what is your approach? I know you've been doing some pretty interesting things on LinkedIn, and I mean, just your nature is to be super connected. Like you're remembering people's names that I'm terrible at remembering names, right? So like I'm always fascinated by the way that you approach people. And Oh, sweet. All right. We're pulling
I
up
was going to wait
LinkedIn.
till
We're
you're
there.
done. I was going
No,
to
I
wait till you're
love it.
done,
It's
but I don't
great.
want to stop you.
So like, I mean, the first word in your profile is people. So,
Yeah.
what is your perspective on how to connect with humans throughout
Yeah.
the job search? Because I do find it to be very difficult for most people.
Well, I think the first thing, goes back to the words you said, which is people, and that it's going to be different. It is just truly part of my nature that, I know you mentioned names, and like I'm not great with names either, but I am really good at remembering things tied to people. So like I'll remember weird things about Martin and Jenny, who I already mentioned. I won't forget their names because I know them, but even like more tangential people, like it's just in my nature to remember the things that people care about. And then yeah, occasionally, like I literally had somebody ask me today, hey, can you? And I don't mind telling you. But like, hey, can you connect me with Dave Hoover, who's this guy that wrote a book on software apprenticeships? I'm thinking about starting a company around that area. So I just sent Dave Hoover a note. And to be honest, like I don't remember the last time I talked to Dave Hoover. I know that he's a really great guy and was helpful to me when I was looking at apprenticeships, and he does care about that topic. I just sent him a note, and he reached out, got back super quick. So I will say one thing. I think, period, it's always going to be different for everybody, because like how could it not be? There's that Dr. Seuss quote. I think it's Dr. Seuss, but it's like you are the most you that any you could be. Like nobody
Ooh,
else can be you. And I
right.
butchered that quote, but if you find it, it will be in this line that like you kind of just got to do it the way that you would do it.
Yeah,
And
that's
sure,
true.
if you're like really somebody that struggles with maybe like some social norms, like yeah, you still you can't be like scaring people or being rude, so get feedback. But in general, you got to do it the way you're going to do it. For me, I think it's been a lot of over time. Like yeah, I try to make intros for other people, because like that's always the easiest thing. I'm not even asking for a favor for myself. I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking for a favor for someone else. So not only do I do a favor for that person, and I feel good about that, it makes me look good because like I'm taking time out of my day to ask this guy Dave to do something that he probably wants to do because he believes in software apprenticeships to help my friend out. So I do think that's one of the best things. If you ever get the opportunity, and whenever I talk to anybody that's working on a project or is in a career search, I'm always thinking about like, I wonder if there's anybody I could connect them to. And I just searched for LinkedIn. Like I had a friend, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm not that smart about it, but like I had a friend yesterday that was like, he's doing some stuff in solar. So like I legit, this is not a good way to do it. Someone's probably smarter than me. I legit just searched solar in here and started going through like first contacts, but in second contacts, but I got down to ones that I was able to make a couple intros for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where it will go, but I think it'll be helpful. So I think that's the first thing is, for me, it's based off of over time trying to connect people when I could,
Mm-hmm.
and not feeling bashful about that. So I think that's how I started it. In the job search, I will say it feels different. I think, and again, I'm speaking as somebody who is like, if there's like two models of employee, like the ones that have like clearly are inside of well-defined roles, and then the ones that are kind of the amorphous things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the amorphous thing. So I would just keep in mind, like my strategies and tips and what I do make sense over here. If you're in the clearly defined role, like in general, job search should be easier because other people won't be confused about what you want. So I have to do more work over here in LinkedIn because of the nature of my career and the type of job search I'm doing. So
I think that's a really important thing just to like pause on really quick, which is if you're trying to do something different, whatever that difference might be, like changing a career, like a lot of people who go through a boot camp, like Startup Institute, where we used to work, if you're trying to make a career shift and go from like one seemingly unrelated industry into another, you have to up the ante in what you're doing else, like what the weird stuff that you're doing. You can't just say like people like, oh, do recruiters work when I graduate a boot camp? Recruiters work less when you graduate a boot camp than if you're just going from junior to senior or senior to director.
yeah.
That's where it's super easy for recruiters to move people up when you're going
Yep.
from one role to the same role, just slightly higher, or a better company or a better pay or something. But if you're going to make a big shift, you got to make a big change in your approach. So I think everything that you're sharing here, especially for the folks that I talk to, 100% necessary, even if they're not as amorphous. These tactics and everything you're sharing are really important.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know. I think, and I think you hit the nail on the head where it's like, there's so many tool analogies. I don't know. That's strange. It's because you do have tools right behind you.
I mean, I'm priming you, right? My marketing
Yeah, you are.
abilities.
I knew it. No, but yeah, the bigger the shift, I think the harder you're gonna have to work. Or at least that's been my experience. I haven't had to do a job search in a while. And this has been a pretty fun one because I've also had contracts and stuff. But it's it's a lot of work, and most of the job search part is like you do work and you get nothing back. So that's why it's challenging. It's like going to the gym a lot, and getting no results or whatever you want to think about it. But it can feel like a little bit of a zero-sum game where you're like putting in effort and you get zero back until you get everything, which is the job. So it is just that way.
Well, and I think unlike the gym, it's just harder to see too. Like we are actually getting better at our social skills. We're getting better at reaching out to people. But we don't value any of those things because it's not like, oh, great, now I've got like a muscle, right?
Yeah.
We're just like, oh, well, yeah, but that's not an important skill to me because it's not my coding skill or something like that. So we almost devalue the things that we are getting in that process.
I think that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I'll have to think about that more as like, again, I'm doing all this stuff in the job search, just like a lot of your like viewers, some skills are getting built.
Yeah. So like I used to go and purposely bomb interviews just to see how bad they would be. And then I know that no interview will ever be as bad as that one that I bombed on purpose. And now I can basically interview anywhere.
That's great. I've never bombed an interview like on purpose. I'm sure.
Well, I'm a career coach, so I'm crazy, but
you got to do it. Yeah, well, that's true. Well, that's and that's your skills, so that's fair. Like you got to do that stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's that, and then in terms of I do try to connect people when I can.
Do you ever worry, sorry, really quick, do you ever worry that you're going to make a bad introduction? Because that's going to be the pushback that we get from anyone who listens to this. Oh, well, what if I introduce someone and they suck and they don't follow up or they reach out poorly or they show up bad? That's going to reflect poorly on me and hurt my career. What would you say to that person?
I will say, I am sure that's happened before. And I think sure, the more intense the introduction, the greater the risk. But for me, like that's only really happened once or twice in my life. And one of the times, like, yeah, I should have known better. Like, because in general, I'll say like I think about it before I do it. Like I don't always say yes. And I usually get somebody's permission before I intro them. Like you saw, I reached out to Dave. Anybody that I don't know super well, or I'm not exactly certain what the ask is going to be, I ask that person first. So I don't know. I wouldn't worry about that a lot. I think there's a greater likelihood that just period doing it is going to grow the garden and the network and generally be better for people than I think it's going to be harmful either to the people you're connecting or to you. So I don't know. I just haven't had that be an experience.
I agree with that. And it does sound like you have a couple like checks and balances prior to just saying, hey, here's a person. So I'm right on board.
Totally. And again, I think that the times when people get anxious about it is when they feel like that person is selling something. And that can even be themselves. So it can still be hard for me to ask for myself, because they're trying to run a objective hiring process, in some ways, like you're trying to get an interview in spite of that. So I think there's some of that there, but in general, I think, if you reach out, I've usually had people want to connect. Not always, like, if I went to my like messages, like, like some people don't respond. I don't know, like,
right.
I've got dozens of messages and some of them are still my message. And I think you'll find too, like, a lot of times it's going to take people a while, both during the holiday, but also because, and this is the thing that I think has actually helped with my psychological health a lot during the job search is like, I am in no one's like top couple things they need to do today, unless they are literally the person hiring. Everyone else that is like, I'm trying to get to help me out or to make an intro, like I wasn't even on their radar until I reached out to them in terms of things they needed to do. So it does help me to like keep in mind, like all these other people are doing this on top of their job, on top of if they have a family, on top of their lives. So it does help you, I think, not take things as personally, because like
Yeah.
that's really hard. I think that's hard in the job search.
That extreme empathy is really important. Just even if it's in, and people say, but what if they are ignoring me? Well, then they are, and like let it
That
go.
happens.
I actually was ghosted by a company that I later got a contract with. They like ghosted me after an interview. They're like, we need to reschedule, and then they never rescheduled. And I was like, what the
Yeah.
hell is going on here?
Yeah.
And I ended up finding out the reason I got ghosted was because I ended up working with those people, much later on. I was like, oh, this person like struggles with anxiety. So they were just like avoidant and they just never responded to the email. That makes sense. I've done that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, if I've done that to people and they've done that to people, and there's nothing to be mad about. And I think I like that you're talking about the psychological side of it, because one of the things that I've learned over the years too is once I send something out, I basically forget that I've done it
Mm.
until either a notification I've sent pops up to remind me that I need to follow up again,
Yeah.
or it's just gone. It's just forever gone. And I don't care that that person didn't get back to me, and I don't even remember that I reached out. Is that kind of the same approach that you're taking?
Yeah. I definitely think that's the case. And then it's like, look, the more you like a company, like, yeah, totally. There's a company in Denver here that I was really into, and they're like in the education space. And like, I knew somebody that worked there, and they're B Corp, like all these really cool stuff. And I got connected, but, they hired someone else for the first role. And then like, I haven't been able to get a hold of them for all the other things. And I've reached out to multiple people, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, it's tough. Um, but and like I didn't get feedback, like, but you just like, I don't know, like it was really hard. And I will say it's hard, and for me, it's like a one-to-one relationship. The more I like the company and I think it's interesting, the harder it is to not obviously get that role, which makes so much sense. So more than anything, I think, you know, I did get frustrated about it, and like I had to like keep myself in line, you know.
How did you
But
bounce back?
I think, I mean, some of it was like I just started applying for other roles. Um, I also like continued to poke other people at the company, so that may not be wise. But I'm very nice in the way I reach out, so I haven't like fully given up on that, I guess. But then it's also like, some of it too is just like with time. Like I'm somebody that like, if I can get like a little bit of time past something, whether it's a defeat of some kind or a bad day or a breakup, like I do think that time heals a lot. And
Mm.
just like, so I guess, yeah, for me it was just like forcing myself to do other things was the only way to do that. And just knowing like, well, I can do what I can do, and that's it. And like really in the job search especially, it is tough because you have to keep pushing yourself, like, and apply to a certain number of jobs or do a certain number of meetings, whatever your thing is, but whilst also only being focused on the things you can control, because in the
Hmm.
job search, man, it feels like a lot is out of your control.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you just have to let it go.
Well, and focusing on what you can control, I know you and I are both fairly active LinkedIn users. And so are there any things that like you would recommend folks think about when it comes to LinkedIn, or things that you've done that really stand out?
I mean, and I think I must have clicked off it because I'm silly, but I mean, I will say, I think, and it's not so much because it was useful to me afterwards. It was like I got a couple of good conversations going afterwards, but I'm trying to figure, how do I see my
I
activity?
think you go to
You can see like,
activity. There it is.
there we go, hot. I'm not. You can see I don't look at my own activity a lot, but I will say I think that like I did take the time, and I think this is probably always worth it. Like, I took the time to like write out and then link to all the people that had done informal interviews with me, actually interviewed me, intros, given me feedback. And to be honest, I forgot some people, and then thank God you can edit LinkedIn posts, and you can always go back and add them, or just say, hey, I forgot, I didn't have space, whatever. But I think that one, a number of those people then reached out. Two, other people, right, that are connected to them, sent me messages. And again, I didn't get like a job out of it, but I got a number of good leads. And I think probably the most important thing is like, it made me feel better about getting all this free help from all these people. And again, I think in the job search, a lot of the struggle is like maintaining and dealing with your own psychology.
Mm.
And so for me, because I am going to continue to need other people to help me in the search and help me find the right thing and give me the opportunity to at least talk to somebody, I have to feel like I am deserving of that, which means I have to give people gratitude first. Otherwise, I don't feel like I deserve the help. I won't ask for the help, and then like it's not going to happen. So,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's just probably in line with my style of job searching. Was that, yeah, like a lot of people have helped me. I try to go out of my way then to thank them, and I write them personal notes also. But I think there's always good stuff to be had there if you can make time to thank people. So like I would say that's a good tip. I think that, whether it's on LinkedIn or somewhere else, I do subscribe to those like kind of like RSS feed things where it emails you when certain companies post a new job.
Mm-hmm.
Cause I did miss out on a couple jobs that just like I was late to applying, and that sucks because it's like, that was in my control. So
Right.
again, I think if you can keep going back to that, I do all the other stuff that people do, I have like a spreadsheet of jobs I applied to, people I need to reach out to, all that kind of stuff. But I do think for me, it's all about the people I can talk to, learn from. Then I have to go synthesize that information myself, and I kind of keep tweaking my process. But in general, it's really been about trying to focus on the stuff I can control, because
Yeah.
there's just in the job search, it's just I don't know. I think it's really I find it very challenging. It's exciting because I get to talk to a lot of people I haven't talked to in a while, but it's also challenging because I don't know, like I don't have to wake up at a certain time tomorrow. I can do whatever the F I want. I mean, I have to get on a plane tomorrow for a thing, but you know what I mean?
Right. And
The
most
kind
people
of
have
the
never
master.
had to do that before. Most people who find themselves out of a job have never had to like make their own schedule. And I've
Yeah.
I've been in and out of entrepreneurship full time, and I'm an entrepreneur again. And
Yeah.
like I just started scheduling 8 a.m. I'm going to be doing live videos on LinkedIn every single morning just to force myself to have a consistent start time to the day. Because sometimes I'll like
Yeah.
get up at 7 and then start working at 10. And I'm like, what the hell did I do for the last few hours?
I do think, yeah, in the job search, just while I do think another challenge for me is that you end up spending so much time in the browser,
Mm-hmm.
and the browser is a window to all things, some of which are useful and some are not. Like I know a lot right now about the Iran, US conflict because I just keep opening freaking Google News. I need to stop. So I do think like I have had those days where like I legit don't know what I did today. It felt like I was doing stuff the whole day. And I oscillate back and forth. I'm not like wildly overscheduled where like everything's going to be on my to-do list, but I also do need to accomplish a couple things a day. So, that's a balance. But for me, it's like, I'm generally applying to at least one job a day. I am talking generally like on the phone with at least one person, usually two.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm, going through all the emails that I've sent or gotten. So that usually is stuff for other people. And then, so like those are 3 or 4 things that are always happening.
Yeah.
And then I'm exercising every day. And it's just
That's
because,
smart.
that last piece again is a big part of my, psychological health. Because yeah, again, I do find, I just, yeah, I know I've said that a couple of times. It's a challenging psychological role to be in the job search process, especially to the extent that your identity is tied to being a worker. And like, because it feels like you're not as valuable. So, I think everybody has to kind of watch out for that when you're in the job search roles.
Yeah, the things I'm taking away from what you're saying is number 1, you have to be active in your search in some way each day. Number 2, you have to interact with real people, because if we're just in the isolation mode, we're going to go crazy after a while. And number 3, we have to move. If I'm sitting on this stool all day, every day, I'm going to go absolutely nuts. So I think those are huge takeaways for like mental health. And then I also want to double down on what you did here in this post, because I think, being grateful and saying thank you to people and remembering to do that, because we do have to kind of force ourselves to remember to do that sometimes. A lot of times the job search will take 3, 6 months to a year, and you might talk to 100 people in that year. Like it might be crazy. And that's actually probably a low number for folks like you and I who are pretty big networkers. And I think what is so interesting, and this was something I heard from a totally different world, which I do think the dating world and relationship world is a hilarious like mirror
Comparison.
to the job world. But someone had a podcast where they were talking about conflicts and in relationships, and how you'll go to your friend and you'll complain about your partner and you'll say, here's all the things that we're arguing about right now and I hate them right now and blah 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 and all this stuff. And then you'll go home later that day and you've gotten everything off your chest, and then you and your partner actually like resolve the issue and you're all happy again and you're moving on with your day. But their friend never got the resolution.
Yeah, right. They think that you guys are still hating each other.
They think they're 3 years from now, they're going to be like, these mother effers are fighting every night. And I know that they never resolved that fight. But so what this podcast was saying was, go back and tell your friend you resolved the conflict so that they can have closure too. And I think the same thing applies to the job search. If we're out there telling everyone, I'm trying to find a job, can you help me? Can you make introductions? I can't tell you how many introductions I've made and never gotten a thank you or a follow-up or what happened after. Did you ever reach out to them? Did you ever meet them? Did you ghost them? Did you get a job with them? I literally don't know. And I'm guilty of this as well, for sure. But it's something I learned at Startup Institute. I think Lisa told me, she's like, you always have to close the loop with the people that helped you. And I think doing things like this, saying thank you, sending out these messages and closing that loop is incredibly important. And it's something that I think most job seekers, because they're so stressed out. And then once you get the job, you're so stressed out just trying to get started. You just completely forget all of that.
Totally. And it's like, I'm looking at this list now and I'm like, oh, I got a couple on there that I gotta reach back out to.
Yeah, exactly. So I know we're coming up on the hour here, and you mentioned earlier that you've learned a few things being on the hiring side. And I think that that's a unique experience that not everyone's had. You and I have both been on the seeker side and the hiring side. And I'm curious, as we kind of wrap up today, are there any things that you would want to share from the perspective of a hiring person that you think would be incredibly helpful for someone who's trying to find a job right now?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or maybe even just sharing what the experience is like for someone who's trying to hire a new employee.
Yeah, well, I think, one, it goes back to that empathy piece. And we talk about the idea of empathy and customer research in pretty much all, jobs these days. And I think, as you're trying to think about the hirer, one, some of it depends on, what their role is. So keep that in mind. Like, I was a hirer who, that was not my only job. Like, I was doing a bunch of other things. So, my role, yeah, right. Versus, again, let's say somebody that's like in a recruiting role that is going to, have to do the first screen type of thing. So I think, one, just keeping in mind the incentives and challenges that person is facing should at least give you a little bit of an opportunity to not take whatever happens personally. So I think that's one. It's like, it's always a lot easier to understand it's not personal when you understand the issues the other person's having. So I think that's the first thing, is like, the more you can understand what it would be like to be in their role. Like, if you're for the hiring manager, like, I'm talking with all these like product owners that are like senior product owners, and like they're drowning in work, like 55, 60 hours a week. So they're like not seeing their kids. And now they have to do an extra 5 hours a week to do all the interviews to hopefully have a better future that's 40 hours a week or 45. Like, that's crazy, because now they were already at 55, they were drowning, they got approval to get somebody to help them not drown, but they're going to drown even worse in the short term because they now have something else to do, aka hiring. So I do think that the more you can understand that and where they're coming from, it for sure has that first effect of not taking it personally. In terms of how it's going to make you a better job seeker, I think it allows you to do things like, when you're reading through the job description, to actually better contextually understand what they're saying. If you really understand the pain of a product manager and the hiring person for this, and you're reading through a job description and it's talking about, okay, writing stories, doing X, Y, and Z, I think it gives me a much better opportunity when I'm writing cover letters and things to understand what they really care about and like where I can actually help them. So I think that would be the biggest thing, is just like, as somebody that's hired, is that, like, okay, what are you actually like, how are you going to actually make my life a little bit easier? And then I think the second thing is, if you can get a sense of, at the company or for the person, the things that they uniquely care about, either from someone else at the company or just even from the way their description is written. I did always feel like, as a hirer, the people that were, and again, and I say this because this is my nature. I'm somebody that responds really strongly to energy. So if someone else is coming in and they're really excited about the role, they're excited about the company, like, I respond really strongly to that. And I don't want to speak for other hiring managers. That was always a really big benefit for me. So my point there is just that, to the extent that you can get a sense of what the hiring manager is like, they're still a person. And to the extent that you can figure out, like, how they really want to communicate, I do feel like in all these things, like, I know we are trying to make hiring a really equitable, unerring process. You're still dealing with people, and people like people that are, going to interact like them. So that might be unusual advice, but I found it to be true and continue to find it to be true.
I love it. Yeah. And being able to adapt to different types of people, I think, is the idea of mirroring is super important. Again, that's like, I feel like we're definitely talking about some of the, as I try and think about the folks that might be listening to this, like, there's different levels of skill within the job search. And, if you're at the point where you're terrified to even reach out to someone in network, focus on that before you start focusing on mirroring. But I love where all this is going. And I think the big takeaway I'm going to get from that last piece that you just said is, the person you're talking to when you're trying to get a job, the thought in their head is, how are you going to make my life a little easier? Where I think most people who are trying to get a job are sitting there going, how is this person going to give me a job and make my life easier? And if you're in opposed mindsets, you need to be in aligned mindsets, and they're not going to change.
I want to say one thing just on that. I agree with what you said. I think the level up to that would be, again, really, like, to the extent, you don't always get to know who you're going to be talking to, but to the extent you do your research, you really need to, the answer to what they really care about is dependent on the person and their relationship to the role. So, like, when I'm interviewing with somebody that's 2 levels above, they don't care as much about how I'm going to make their life easier, because I'm not going to work for them directly. They're concerned probably about how I make their direct reports' life easier, or can I add unique skills to the team? And it depends on how rigorous they are with their hiring process. But I do think there are times when it's not exactly true, because that is true for the person who you are going to be reporting to or working with. So I just want to give that nuance of, like, the CEO doesn't care about, like, they're not thinking about how you're going to make their life easier. They're like the last culture check, and just, like, making sure that this isn't going off the rails, and it's a communication to you that this is an important hire to them. So I do want to just keep the critical thinking mind on for everybody of, like, you should be thinking about, depending on the person that's interviewing you and their relation to this role, what they want to get out of it. And it's not, I think it's usually, how is this going to make my life easier? Because I think we're optimizing machines, but I just think there's some times where it's a little bit different.
Absolutely. Well, Brent, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with where you're taking things in your career next. And just want to give you, or just say thank you so much for being our second guest here and sharing so much, both on the hiring side and the job seeker side. I think everything you've always been inspirational to me as I've worked with you at Startup Institute and seen the stuff you've done, especially at some of my lower points where I was in between things and trying to figure out what the hell I was doing. And I was like, you seem to have it all together. I'm going to go talk to you. And so thank you for hanging around, man. It's just been awesome knowing you.
Totally. I think that's a good ending point as well. Is, like, I've never really thought of you as somebody that was, like, having a low point. I know that everybody does, but, like, on the outside, everybody looks like they have their stuff together. And so, like, I was like, man, I can't think of when you were like, oh, didn't have my stuff together. I said, Martin,
all right, well, we'll talk off air on that.
Okay, bye.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks so much.